Well, as China embraces its new wolf warrior diplomacy, Australia's national interest is consistently compromised. The Chinese government party utilises hostile rhetoric that takes the form of propaganda, trying to bully Australia to conform to Beijing's strategic and political personality. For more on this, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute's Peter Jennings joins me live. Welcome to the program, Peter.
Thank you, Cory.
Peter, we've noticed an escalation in the rhetoric coming from China. We now have trade wars, we have threatened embargoes. It's virtually a new Cold War where even our diplomats aren't able to get their Chinese equivalents on the phone. Is this unprecedented in our relationship with China?
I think the last time China went through a phase like this was during the days of the Great Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, so, well before most people's living memories, Cory. But there is a cultural revolution feel to what Xi Jinping, the head of the Communist Party, is actually doing in China right now. And it's all designed really to stoke a domestic nationalist sentiment in China. I think Xi Jinping's view is if you can't deliver economic growth for the Chinese people and if you've mismanaged the coronavirus, well, at least you can stoke nationalist sentiment. And so they're doing it with this very aggressive diplomacy all around the world. It can feel sometimes like Australia is being singled out. Actually, we're not. This is happening in Europe and many other parts of the world as well. So it's unusual. I don't think it's going to work to China's long-term interests. But I think for as long as Xi Jinping is Premier, we will have to deal with this reality of the wolf warrior diplomacy coming from Beijing.
Well, Peter, it probably seems a bit more targeted towards Australia because it has the real potential to cripple our economy. I read on the weekend that China are developing iron ore programs in Africa where they don't have the political resistance perhaps they do here. They're looking for alternative supplies of critical goods. And our economy is hugely dependent on Chinese trade. They are our largest trading partner. Can we restore it to what it was, or are things toppling too far in the one direction?
I don't think there's any prospect that we'll be returning to an economic relationship with China which isn't deeply harmed by the political and strategic behaviour of the Communist Party. And so that means that Australia is going to go through, I think, a really dislocating economic period. Frankly, we will be paying a price for what was a rather lazy a period where we allowed ourselves to become way too dependent on a single Chinese market. But, Cory, my view is the good news is we can change this. We don't have to accept the line that we are forever going to be dependent on China. In my lifetime, Australia has moved from a large degree of trade dependence on the UK, which ended after Britain joined the European Union. Then it shifted to a significant amount of dependence for our exports on Japan. And then that too changed over the last 20 years by a growing dependence on China. I think what will happen now is you'll see Australia diversify. We won't have any one country which is going to be as dominating in our market as China has been, but we will grow markets in Southeast Asia and India. We'll regrow markets in Europe, which we're rather allowed to wither. And so there is a future here, but we will face significant economic dislocation in the next couple of years, I think.
And outside of the economic dislocation, there's also a national security issue. We know the Chinese Communist Party are behind a lot of the cyber attacks on this country. That's been billed in Malcolm Turnbull's book. We've seen an expansionist China move into the South China Sea. And might I say that was done under the Turnbull government and with nary a whimper. They believed that they would not militarise it, or because that's what the Chinese told them. This is a clear strategic threat not only to our trade routes, isn't it, and to our national security. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're actually underestimating a very risky period that we're moving into right now. With over the last few months, really since February and COVID, a much more aggressive use of Chinese military forces in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. And the risk that this could turn into not simply an economic crisis and a health crisis, but a military crisis, I think is something that Australians need to think about and focus on very, very seriously. The risk I'm most worried about, Cory, is that sometime between the US presidential election and about mid-next year, when in June we have the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party, we will see a crisis around Taiwan, which could be a blockade of the Straits. It could be an attempt by China to sort of coerce Taiwan into, as China would put it, being reunified with the mainland. But all of this could lead, if we're not careful, to a serious military problems within months, right? Not years, but within months. And that is a kind of natural... Sorry, Cory, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, you're not alone in forecasting that. There's a number of people who have suggested that if there's any ambiguity about the US election, presidential election, China may use that as a part of their program to reintegrate Taiwan. And globally, we've seen this in recent history. We saw the Russia annex the Ukraine, and the world nary made a whimper about it. Would the world react differently if China went after Taiwan as a reunification program?
Well, I hope that the world does, and in particular, I hope that the United States does. Ukraine and the South China Sea were really products of the second-term Obama administration failing to read the strategic signals carefully enough and failing to see it as being in America's interests to step in. Now, in the case of Taiwan, Cory, what you have is a liberal democracy of 25 million people who very much do not want to be incorporated into the Chinese state. And I, as an Australian, a member of a liberal democracy of 25 million people, I think to myself, it's very much in Australia's interests to see that Taiwan is looked after. If Taiwan is abandoned to China because it all looks too difficult on the part of the US or anyone else, what confidence can we have that our security is going to be respected and that countries will come to our assistance? So, this is a moment where I think the democracies need to band together. And collectively, we need to be saying to China, don't be so silly. Do not think that you can get away with this type of military adventurism. This will come at a very high cost. So I do hope that whatever happens in the US presidential election, that people are watching Taiwan closely and understanding that America's role here is absolutely critical to the stability, not just of Taiwan, but of Asia as a whole.
Well, perhaps, Peter, part of the Australian government telegraphing that would be providing some diplomatic recognition to Taiwan instead of pretending it sort of doesn't exist. Peter Jennings, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really do appreciate your insights and sharing them with us.
It's a pleasure, Cory. Thanks very much.